Dawn broke over the airfield as Major Diana Phoenix Vega tightened the laces on her worn combat boots. Each scuff on her boots marked a silent victory: survival, resilience, battles fought in silence. But today, her routine was interrupted. General Harrington's shadow stretched across the tarmac, his voice steady and cold. "You're off the mission." Little did anyone know, her code name held the key to a hidden operation that would change everything. The other pilots watched as she removed her helmet without protest. Back in her locker, her fingers brushed a faded photographices, erased by time and secrecy. Even as uncertainty pressed in, Phoenix turned to the ritual that had carried her through every mission. She set her duffel on the bench and began the ritual of preparedness, each step pared down to its essentials. Phoenix folded her flight suit along the reinforced seams, insignia facing outward, smoothing the fabric before placing it at the bottom of the bag. The act was deliberate, almost meditative, a gesture of respect for the uniform and the role it represented. She reached for her helmet, its dark visor catching the overhead lights, and nestled it beside the suit, careful not to disturb its alignment. The process was stripped of excess, just the necessary motions, nothing wasted. Inside the locker, 3 objects waited on the shelf. The combat boots, their edges softened by years of desert sand and tarmac, sat beside a faded photograph and a brass compass. She picked up the compass, feeling the cool metal in her palm. The engraving MK-12 matched the serial on her old service pistol, a detail from her time under Chess Protocol Directive 12. The compass needle remained fixed on northwest, unmoved by the metal surroundings. She turned it over, recalling the bearing that had led her squadron home through a dust storm over Al-Assad, the faint green glow that guided her during a silent insertion near Kandahar. Each memory surfaced briefly, then settled, as if slotting into a larger pattern she could not yet see. The photograph came next. 5 figures in faded camouflage stood in front of a crumbling structure, boots stirring pale dust. 3 faces were blacked out, the marks hiding identities lost to classified operations. The 4th figure, unmistakably a younger General Harrington, stood rigid and unsmiling. Only Phoenix's own face was left untouched, though the insignia on her collar showed a rank she no longer wore. She didn't linger on the image, letting the weight of erased history pass through her. Her hand found the groove at the back of the locker, a shallow depression worn smooth by repetition. She had accessed her hidden compartment countless times, always under the radar. The routine was familiar, a private checkpoint before every mission, no matter how the circumstances changed. She placed the boots in last, heels aligned with the duffel's reinforced corner. The right boot still held a trace of sand from Kabul, a stubborn reminder of where she'd been. Across the room, the other pilots joked and stuffed their bags without ceremony, unaware of the significance behind Phoenix's careful preparation. Her fingers brushed her dog tags, feeling the faint outline of the engraved chess piece, a silent acknowledgement of the directives that shaped her every move. Closing the duffel's flap, she buckled each strap in order, her motions calm and steady. The process ended as it always did, marked by a quiet certainty. Private First Class Willis approached, manifest in hand. His voice dropped as if delivering a personal blow rather than a routine order. "Sorry, Major. General's orders your name just came off the flight roster." Phoenix nodded, hand resting on the worn handle of her bag. The locker door clicked shut behind her, the sound precise and final, as the morning's quiet gave way to the shifting lights and distant footsteps of command. General Harrington's office was a study in order and intent. The operational map stretched across the far wall, corners curled from years of use. 6 red pushpins marked Phoenix's most significant missions, each carefully annotated in Harrington's tight script. The paper near Kabul's coordinates had grown thin from repeated handling. A 7th pin rested in his palm, its metal tip dented from pressure, but he hesitated to place it. A photograph of Lieutenant Connor Harrington, his son, held a place of prominence on the side table. The young man's uniform was immaculate, his expression measured. The image had been taken just weeks before the Kubel exfil operation mission that ended in tragedy. Connor's death at Kubel was the dark cloud over this base, shaping the general's every decision since. Harrington's fingers lingered on the frame, tracing the edge until they met the safe built into the wall. Below the keypad, a brass plate bore the words, "The chain of command is sacrosanct." He opened the safe and slid the sealed file inside, the label clear, Chess Protocol Directive 12Es only. Beyond the window, a satellite dish rotated in steady arcs, its movement synchronized with activity on the tarmac. Monitors on Harrington's desk displayed Phoenix's route from the locker room to Hangar 7, her image sharp in black and white. Each step she took was tracked, the feed occasionally flickering as the dish recalibrated. He watched her pause near the fuel depot, his pen tapping the desk in an unconscious rhythm. The intercom buzzed. "Sir, the Secretary of Defense is on Secure Line 1. He's requesting immediate view of this briefing." Harrington acknowledged with a clipped response, not looking up from the personnel file open before him. The photo inside showed a younger Phoenix, her expression unchanged, though her haircut and insignia marked a different time. The date was 3 months before Connor's death. Most of the text was redacted, but one line stood out. Operational Command Authority granted per Chess Protocol Directive 12. A momentary glitch flickered across the security feed. The timestamp jumped backward, then reset. Harrington's hand hovered over the phone, but he waited, watching as the screen stabilized. His reflection merged with his son's photograph in the glass, the two profiles overlapping. His aide entered with coffee, but Harrington waved him off. His focus remained on the Nightshade mission briefing. He had circled the exfiltration coordinates himself, noting how they matched the emergency rally point from Kubel. The official paperwork called it tactical optimization. His own notes in the margin suggested otherwise. Sunlight shifted across the desk as the satellite dish outside adjusted, illuminating a line of text at the bottom of Phoenix's Filian addendum dated the day after Connor's memorial. Harrington's signature was pressed deep beside the words, "Transfer denied." The ink was darker where the pen had dug in. The office, silent except for the hum of electronics, held the weight of choices made and consequences still unfolding. Down below, Phoenix moved beneath the shadow of a grounded C-130. In her locker, a photograph waited, its edges curled, its secrets pressed between layers of memory and dust. Phoenix kept her eyes on the photograph as she sat on the locker room bench, the image propped against the metal shelf. 5 figures in desert camouflage stood shoulder to shoulder in front of a plain, sun-bleached building. The 3 faces, obscured by black marker, drew attention. First, thick lines carefully applied, the ink bleeding through the paper and erasing all but the faintest contours. Each blacked-out silhouette represented years of secrecy, the kind that left no trace in official records. The 2 visible faces were unmistakable. A younger Lieutenant Connor Harrington, his posture tense and alert, and Phoenix herself, wearing the insignia of a Colonel A rank she no longer held. She studied her own image, noting the steady gaze that hadn't changed, even as her rank had. The Colonel's oak leaves on her collar stood out against the desert uniform, a silent reminder of a time before demotion and reassignment. The background, a nondescript concrete structure, matched the blueprints she'd reviewed for Operation Nightshade. That building had vanished from the satellite feeds 6 years ago, demolished soon after the Kubel operation. Its presence in the photograph rooted the memory in a place and time she could not escape. The memory of that day was sharp. Dust curled around their boots, caught in the camera's flash. She remembered the taste of grit, the heat pressing through her uniform, and the way Connor Harrington had clutched a file folder just out of frame. She knew the contents by heart: coordinates, call signs, the operational details that would become the foundation of Nightshade's secondary objective. The folder's outline pressed faintly against Connor's thigh, a detail almost invisible but unmistakable to her. Turning the photograph over, Phoenix traced the notes on the back. The first, written in pencil, simply read, "Cable Exfil Team, confirmed, sanitized." The second, in black marker, said, "Burn after," with an arrow pointing to her face and the words, Except checkmate. The marker had eaten through the paper, leaving a small hole. She pressed her thumb over it, feeling the roughness where the paper had thinned. A shaft of light from the window revealed a series of tiny pinholes near the bottom edge grid coordinates, pressed into the photo by a careful hand. Phoenix ran her fingernail along the pattern, recognizing the emergency rally point for Nightshade. The photograph was more than a keepsake. It was a coded record, a reminder of the mission parameters known only to those 5 figures. She shifted on the bench, and the angle of the light changed. For a moment, the blacked-out faces revealed subtle details beneath the marker. The curve of an ear, the shadow of a jawline. She recognized them by memory: the chipped tooth of the man on the right, the gold cross that caught the sun at the woman's collar. Each erased identity was a story she carried alone. Phoenix returned the photograph to its spot, aligning it precisely in the locker. The metal beneath it showed a faint outline, less tarnished than the rest. She closed the door softly, the click muffled by the hum of distant machinery. The image lingered in her mind as she stood and slung her duffel over her shoulder, the weight of the past settling into its familiar place. As Phoenix stepped into the corridor, the routine sounds of the base faded behind her. She moved toward the hangars, her pace steady, the photograph's hidden truths pressing just beneath the surface, waiting for the next move. Colonel Weaver matched Phoenix's pace as she neared Hangar 4, his steps deliberate, the silence between them measured. Security cameras tracked their progress, red lights blinking in silent rhythm. Weaver offered a formal handshake, a gesture that passed unnoticed by the maintenance crew nearby. In that brief contact, something cold and flat pressed into her palm: a data chip, exchanged with practiced ease. The transfer was seamless, concealed by the routine of military courtesy. "They activated the failsafe," Weaver murmured, keeping his gaze forward. His wedding ring, bearing a rook insignia that matched the one etched on Phoenix's dog tags, flashed briefly in the morning light. The reflection distorted in the curved steel of a fuel tank, faces stretched and blurred, the truth of their conversation hidden in plain sight. Phoenix slipped the chip into her pocket, the weight familiar. It was the same model used during the cable exfiltration, the same slight imperfection near the contact points. Weaver's shoulder brushed hers as they passed under a camera blind spot. "Harrington's running diagnostics on the Nightshade birds. Officially, it's routine. Unofficially, your access codes were revoked an hour ago." His words were quiet, meant for her alone. A fuel truck rolled past, its shadow dividing them for a moment. Weaver's reflection in the tank lagged behind his movements, mouth moving out of sync, a subtle reminder of the distortion that always seemed to follow the details of cable. The warped image echoed the uncertainty of their situation. "Your locker's clean for now," Weaver said, adjusting his sunglasses. "But they'll sweep it again after you're gone." His thumb tapped twice against his thigh, an old field signal. Comms compromised. The rook on his ring caught the light as he gestured to a passing patrol, his movements casual, every detail calculated. Phoenix counted cameras without shifting her focus, aware of every angle they covered. The chip pressed against her thigh, a familiar precaution from missions past. She'd carried contraband through more checkpoints than she could remember, each time trusting only the smallest margin for error. Weaver slowed near a stack of cargo pallets, glancing at a puddle that mirrored their silhouettes. His hand hovered near his sidearm, then dropped. "They're scrubbing the manifests. All records of your involvement in chess protocol are being erased." He said the words quietly, his tone clipped. The satellite dish above rotated, casting a moving shadow that briefly linked their distorted reflections in the fuel tank. For an instant, the rook on Weaver's ring and the chess piece on Phoenix's dog tags aligned in the warped metal, forming the outline of a chessboard before the image broke apart. "Remember the extraction point," Weaver said, voice barely above a whisper. He adjusted his cap, revealing a fresh scar along his hairline mark that Phoenix recognized from others who had questioned orders after Cabell. The detail was small, but it spoke volumes. A gust of wind rolled an empty oil drum across their path, the noise masking Weaver's final words: "Checkmate moves first." His reflection lingered in the tank a moment longer. the rook insignia stretching thin before dissolving in the light. Phoenix kept walking, her hand closing around the chip. The hardware was identical to what she'd buried years ago, a fail-safe measure by design. Behind her, Weaver's footsteps faded toward the command center, his shadow intersecting briefly with Harrington's aide. The satellite dish continued its slow rotation, its movement almost imperceptible against the background of the busy tarmac. Above the comms building, the satellite dish maintained its silent vigil, tracking a path that no one on the ground had programmed. Its presence was easy to overlook amid the routine of the base technicians' work nearby, eyes on their tasks, never glancing up at the slow, deliberate tilt of the antenna. Tool marks scored the concrete at its base, 4 neat grooves that matched the number of logged access attempts to the classified chess protocol files last month. Phoenix took in the detail as she walked past, the pattern familiar and deliberate. Sunlight caught the rim of the dish, casting a narrow beam through the barracks window. The light landed on the back wall of Phoenix's locker, illuminating a sequence of stamped numbers that matched a serial she'd seen years ago outside Raqqa, MK.XI1. The repetition of that code, here and abroad, was no accident. The dish's movement and the numbers it revealed were pieces in a pattern she recognized from past operations. A technician worked at the dish's control panel, fingers moving quickly across the keypad as error codes flashed and reset. The sequence E47, E92, repeated before the system cleared itself. Maintenance logs would show only routine alignment checks, nothing about the dish's unscheduled recalibrations or its habit of tracking objects that weren't listed in any orbital database. The official record would stay clean, but Phoenix knew the signs of a system running its own agenda. At the base of the antenna, scuff marks circled the access panel. These weren't from standard maintenance. The pattern twowed deep gouges at the hingeswas, consistent with someone using a pilot's emergency knife to force the panel open. Phoenix's own blade bore similar scars from a rescue years before. The evidence of covert access lingered, overlooked by those who didn't know to look. As the morning advanced, the dish shifted again, this time without any command. Its shadow swept across the tarmac, briefly intersecting Phoenix's path. The security cameras on the building froze for 4 seconds, just long enough to miss Weaver's approach with the data chip. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. Up close, the dish's motor emitted a steady hum, 2 short pulses, 1 long. Phoenix recognized the cadence from her time at Cable. There, the same sound had signaled encrypted data bursts, always on a 17-minute cycle. Here, the pattern matched the pulsing green light on the hidden scanner in her locker, a silent signal that the network was active. Technical Sergeant Lin stood nearby, reviewing diagnostics on his tablet. The display showed normal operations, but the orientation data was off by 15 degrees, enough to indicate the dish was tracking something outside standard parameters. Lin frowned at the discrepancy before shutting the device off, deciding not to log the anomaly. Phoenix paused beneath the dish, noting faint etchings on the support Struta, 7-digit code, sharp and recent, matching the numbers now visible in her locker. Maintenance records claimed the strut had been replaced last year, yet the code was already weathered. The markings didn't belong, but their presence was intentional. Her reflection in the dish's surface stretched and warped as she moved, the image taller and broader echoing her old rank, a reminder of the person she'd been. As she continued toward the hangar, the hum of the dish followed, cycling through its familiar pattern. The data chip in her pocket warmed, responding to the same frequency. Phoenix walked on, her gaze steady, the coded signals converging as she approached her locker. Phoenix dialed the combination 172346, each number aligning with a muted click. The lock disengaged, and she opened the door to a locker that, on its surface, looked like any other on base. Manuals sat stacked by regulation, a uniform folded to standard, a hygiene kit resting at the bottom. But beneath the order, every detail served a purpose beyond routine. Tucked between the flight manuals was a stress ball, shaped like a chess king. She picked it up, noting its unexpected heft. A gentle twist at the base revealed a seam, splitting the piece in 2. Inside, a micro SD card glinted beneath a strip of thermal tape, its label vanishing as her fingers warmed it. The grooves pressed into the foam matched the tool marks she'd seen outside at the satellite dish, an echo of access attempts, hidden in plain sight. The manuals themselves bore signs of intentional wear. Certain pages in the NATOPS guide were dog-eared, not at random but forming deliberate patterns. Page 137, with its bent corner, corresponded to the emergency landing protocol. Page 212, creased at a sharp angle, highlighted the F-35 fuel system schematic. When cross-referenced, the sequence spelled checkmate in Morse code. The same word repeated in the Morse training booklet, redundancy suggesting urgency. A faint coffee stain obscured a letter, but its ring aligned with a hole in Phoenix's photograph, reinforcing the message's intent. She examined the back panel of the locker, dull gray, indistinguishable from the others. Pressing her palm to the upper right corner, she waited. After a few seconds, a seam appeared and slid open, revealing a compact biometric scanner. Its green LED pulsed in time with the dish's rotation outside. Phoenix placed her thumb on the reader. The scanner cycled through its recognition sequence, registering the faint scar along her print. A data port slid out, sized precisely for the chip Weaver had handed her. The mechanism locked in place with a muted click, as familiar as the safety on her sidearm. On the inside of the door, a grid of scratches marked the growth of rust spots over time. The darkest points outlined the cable facility's perimeter, with a single tack hole at the original insertion point now filled with a trace of sand. The shelf liner, indented by the Chess King's weight, peeled back to reveal a relief map etched into the metal. The elevation lines matched both the cable's site and Nightshade's primary target, connecting past and present operations. Phoenix returned each item with practiced care, the SD card now hidden in her boot heel. The biometric scanner retracted, its light fading. As she closed the panel, the satellite dish outside shifted, its movement mirrored by a subtle vibration through the locker's frame. The Chess King rolled slightly, stopping at an angle that would mean nothing to anyone else. By the time footsteps echoed in the corridor, the locker looked untouched. Only the Chess King sat a fraction off its mark, rotated to the same orientation used for stealth activation on Nightshade's aircraft. Across the room, a security camera's LED flickered once, then steadied, as if acknowledging the silent exchange. Elsewhere on base, the atmosphere shifted. A sense of anticipation settled, unnoticed by most. In the next room, monitors glowed to life, ready to deliver new orders. A sudden shift in the briefing room's atmosphere came with the sharp activation of the secure video link. The Secretary of Defense appeared on the screen, background blurred, his expression unreadable. He wasted no time. "I've been informed of a significant command decision regarding Operation Nightshade. I'm overriding your command decision. Put checkmate on the roster." The call sign landed with weight. Most officers in the room exchanged uncertain glances. The designation meant nothing to them, but General Harrington's pen hovered above the paperwork, unmoving. The secretary's tie clip, a silver chess rook, caught the overhead lights, a detail not lost on Phoenix, standing at parade rest near the back. He glanced aside, likely reading classified data unseen by those present. "General Harrington, this is not a request. Insert checkmate into Nightshade's primary sortie." The directive cut through the room, prompting aides to scramble through folders and digital files. Harrington's hand tightened on Phoenix's personnel file. As he flipped through the pages, black redaction bars spread across entire paragraphs, erasing details in real time. The auto-redaction left only fragments: a name, a date, a call sign. The rest dissolved into encrypted code. Beyond the glass, the satellite dish outside the building shifted with a mechanical click, aligning precisely with the briefing room's monitors. Technicians nearby logged the movement as routine, but Phoenix recognized the pattern. The dish's orientation now mirrored the angle of the secondary monitor, which displayed classified schematics. Only she would understand. The secretary leaned forward, his voice steady. 5 years ago, Operation Chess Protocol was established under Colonel Diana Vega. She developed the encryption algorithm the target facility is now attempting to replicate. The revelation drew a visible reaction. Several officers straightened, recalculating everything they thought they knew about Major Vega. Harrington's jaw tensed at the mention of her former rank. The secretary continued. Her rank adjustment and transfer were for operational security and her personal safety. She remains the only individual capable of completing this mission successfully. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder as the secretary listed protocol parameters. Each mention of checkmate triggered faint static from Harrington's file, barely audible, but enough to draw side glances. The microprint along the file's margin dissolved, replaced by alphanumeric sequences. Phoenix's posture remained unchanged, but her thumb tapped twice against her thigh, the subtle acknowledgement of encrypted orders. The satellite dish outside emitted a low-frequency pulse. Its vibration carried through the floor and into the metal of Phoenix's dog tags. The chess piece engraving pressed into her skin, a physical reminder of the past she'd worked to keep hidden. Harrington started to speak, but the secretary's voice overrode him, crisp and final. This is Chess Protocol Directive 12. The authority is mine. Electronic displays in the room flickered, footers scrolling with lines of quantum encryption before security filters locked them down. An aide dropped his stylus, the sound sharp in the silence. Phoenix stood motionless, as the secretary outlined procedures only she would execute. His tie clip reflected a flash of light, coordinates etched into the surface. When he referenced Phase 3 contingencies, the satellite dish adjusted by less than a degree, its face now fixed on Phoenix's position. The feed cut out mid-sentence, leaving the secretary's image frozen on the screen. As the staff worked to reset the monitors, Harrington noticed his notes had changed. Handwritten margins now matched Phoenix's flight log notations from years before, the ink unfamiliar. His pen hovered, uncertain, as biometric data appeared beneath the tip. Phoenix inhaled, the first visible sign of response since the secretary's order. The satellite dish outside held its position, perfectly still. The room, uncertain and silent, waited for what would come next, as Phoenix prepared to step forward. Phoenix entered the briefing room in full flight gear, the material of her flight suit taut across her shoulders, boots silent on the tile. She paused at the threshold, then reached for the Velcro patch above her left chest. The sound as she peeled it away was precise, deliberate. Beneath, the silver oak leaves of a kernel caught the overhead light, edges dulled by years of wear but impossible to mistake. The insignia's sudden appearance shifted the room's energy. Conversations stopped. Eyes tracked the gleam of rank, the unspoken calculus of authority recalibrating in real time. Her posture changed as she advanced toward the tactical display. Shoulders squared, chin even, the stance of someone who had given orders in combat and expected them to be followed. She addressed the Secretary of Defense directly, voice steady and unhurried. "Sir, checkmate acknowledges readiness for phase execution." She bypassed General Harrington without hesitation, a subtle but unmistakable signal of where true authority now resided. The Secretary's nod confirmed it, his expression unchanged, except for a flicker of recognition. The chess king's stress ball in her thigh pocket pressed a faint outline into the flight suit, its presence as much a talisman as a tool. Harrington's gaze settled on it for a heartbeat before shifting to the window, where the satellite dish outside had stopped its sweep, now fixed on the briefing room. The alignment was exact, the intent behind it clear to anyone who noticed. A junior officer fumbled with his tablet, the device clattering to the floor and drawing attention to Phoenix's shadow across the tactical display. Her silhouette bisected the projected schematics at a key structural point, a detail that did not escape the operations chief, whose hands hovered over the keyboard, waiting for her lead. Phoenix removed her gloves, revealing a pale scar along her right thumb. She tapped the display, entering a 17-digit authorization code. The system responded instantly, layers of encrypted data unfolding at her touch, more information than any standard protocol would allow. Her access was absolute. Across the room, the sound of her dog tags shifting beneath her collar was barely audible, the engraved chess piece pressing briefly into her skin. The satellite dish outside emitted a low pulse, enough to set the water in a glass trembling, unnoticed by most in the room. The secretary leaned forward. "Colonel Vega will lead the insertion team." The announcement landed with finality. Harrington's pen left a dark streak across the operational timeline, stalled mid-sentence. Phoenix showed no reaction to the confirmation of her rank, her expression unchanged. The moment clarified the chain of command for everyone present. Outside, ground crews accelerated their preparations on the lead aircraft, their movements unconsciously mirroring Phoenix's gestures as she pointed out approach vectors on the tactical display. One mechanic paused, wiping sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of grease in the same place Phoenix's helmet would rest. The chess king's weight in her pocket grew more pronounced as she leaned over the table, its crown pressing through the fabric and aligning with the weak points marked on the schematic. The satellite dish outside remained motionless, its support struts creaking as the metal cooled. Phoenix turned to leave, her boots leaving faint scuffs on the polished floor. The marks matched the tread from her old boots, the same ones worn during the cable operation. As she passed Harrington's table, his file auto-redacted another line, the last visible words reading, "Operational authority supersedes all rank." The door closed quietly behind her. Through the window, the satellite dish shifted by a fraction, realigning itself with the building's comms array. In the briefing room, attention returned to the display now, waiting for Phoenix's next move. Phoenix brought the facility schematics onto the main display, her movements efficient, each gesture revealing a new layer of information. The overlays shifted from standard blueprints to wireframe projections, showing the target's internal structure with unusual clarity. As she cycled through the views, the outline of Cable's ruins briefly appeared beneath the modern corridors, an unmistakable echo of the past, embedded in the present. Officers exchanged uncertain looks as the connection became clear. This mission was not just about a new threat, but about unfinished business tied to the Cubble operation. She focused on Sector 7, highlighting the ventilation junctions. "These were engineered with built-in resonance points," she explained, tracing a path through the schematic. Only someone with intimate knowledge of the original design would recognize the pattern of deliberate vulnerability embedded during construction. The chessboard motif emerged at full magnification, black squares marking structural weak spots. The Morse sequences from her flight manuals aligned perfectly with these points, confirming that the facility's greatest weakness was one she had designed herself. A brief flicker on the display revealed an old watermark. Lieutenant Harrington's face, time-stamped hours before the Cable demolition. The system stabilized, but the implication lingered. Phoenix isolated the power grid, switching between current and legacy configurations. They retained the original failsafe triggers, she noted, drawing a dotted line to a sublevel absent from standard briefings. The coordinates matched the emergency rally point hidden in her locker, connecting the mission's objective to a specific place only she could access. She entered a command, and the display rendered a 3D model of the Chess King's stress ball. Its base aligned with the central server, the heart of the quantum encryption system. "All encryption nodes radiate from here," Phoenix said. The schematic rotated, each crown spike terminating at a vulnerability she alone understood. The satellite dish outside adjusted, causing a momentary distortion on the screen just long enough for the blueprint to morph into Cable's silhouette, heat signatures moving toward a breach point. Switching to airflow diagrams, Phoenix pointed out an intake valve engraved with a chess piece. "This is where they'll attempt to breach protocol," she said. The materials and measurements matched those she'd improvised at Cable, and the revision log bore her service number, dated years after the original site's destruction. Zooming out, the perimeter defenses reconfigured into a chessboard pattern of detail mirrored on her dog tags. The satellite dish's hum vibrated through the floor as Harrington's reflection merged with an old image of his son on the display, both fixed on Sector 7. Phoenix closed the files, triggering printers across the command center to produce hard copies marked with the checkmate watermark. The final page showed an access tunnel added to the northwest corner, its dimensions and coordinates matching her compass bearing from years before. Outside, ground crews began loading gear onto her aircraft, the equipment marked with serials that echoed those from the cable mission. The satellite dish completed its adjustment, its shadow stretching across the runway in a checkered pattern. Phoenix stepped away from the display, her focus shifting to the flight line. The details of the mission settled in the minds of those present, each officer aware that success depended on knowledge only she possessed. Phoenix moved along the flight line, her boots pressing deep, deliberate marks into the damp concrete. The early morning light stretched her shadow ahead, long and sharp, separating her from the bustle of the ramp. Ground crews worked with a focus that bordered on reverence. The crew chief, usually quick with a greeting, kept his eyes on a diagnostic panel, running his finger down a checklist twice before setting it aside. Other mechanics arranged tools with careful precision, aligning wrenches and torque bars in parallel lines that pointed northwest, echoing the orientation of her old compass. There was no idle conversation, no casual banter. Instead, the atmosphere tightened with the quiet acknowledgement of what was at stake. As Phoenix approached her jet, a technician double-tapped the access panel, then paused and did it again. Across the tarmac, another crew member checked the same landing gear 3 times, mirrors catching the rising sun and sending quick flashes across her visor. The rituals were subtle, but each movement carried the weight of tradition and silent communication details only those who had served with her before would recognize. She paused near her aircraft, the F-35's skin, reflecting both the pale sky and the slow sweep of the satellite dish overhead. A respectful nod from the crew chief replaced the usual pre-flight briefing. He handed her the clipboard, his hands steady, eyes meeting hers for a moment longer than protocol required. The maintenance notes were written over with a 17-digit code, the same sequence she'd entered in the briefing room. He tore the sheet free and tucked it away, a silent gesture of trust. Harrington stood a few yards away, his posture rigid, boots planted near a dark stain on the tarmac. The stained shape mirrored the Libyan coastline, and Phoenix stepped across it, her tread aligning with the faint marks left during the cable mission. The detail was not lost on the ground crew, who watched from the periphery, their faces unreadable. The air felt charged, the difference between routine and ritual clear to anyone paying attention. As she climbed the boarding ladder, the aircraft's shadow merged with her own, the line between pilot and machine blurring for a moment. A loose page from an operations manual fluttered to the ground, landing at her feet. The schematic matched the one she'd highlighted earlier, Sector 7, the weak point only she could exploit. She stepped over the page without pause, the crew noting the action but saying nothing. The radio at the fueling station crackled, static filling the air for 4 seconds. When it cleared, Phoenix was already settling into the cockpit, strapping in with practiced efficiency. Her boots left new scuff marks on the ladder, the pattern matching those from years before. The crew chief tapped the fuselage twice, paused, then tapped twice. Moria's signal carried forward from other missions, understood without a word. The engines spooled up, the sound merging with the low vibration of the satellite dish as it locked into its final position. The ground crew stepped back, forming a silent perimeter as the canopy closed. Their silence was complete, a collective acknowledgement of the moment's gravity and of the leader among them. Phoenix adjusted her gloves, eyes scanning the instrument panel. The flight line, now bathed in the pale glow of the morning, held its breath as the aircraft's systems came alive. The squadron formed up behind her, their movements synchronized, the choreography of preparation complete. She glanced once at the crew below, their nods returning her gaze. The last checks finished, Phoenix settled her hands on the controls, ready for what came next. The control tower's voice filtered in through the headset, clipped and routine. Phoenix keyed in the transmission frequency, her call sign flickering across the tower screens first. Vega, then checkmate, the sequence repeating in a silent code that only a few on base would recognize. The anomaly registered on the technician's monitor, but no one spoke. The tower chief logged it as interference, same as he had years before, unwilling to break the pattern. A low pulse from the satellite dish rippled through the air, subtle enough to go unnoticed by most. Across the base, digital clocks froze for 4 seconds, each display locked on the date of the cable blackout. For those who remembered, the moment carried weight. The ground crew at Phoenix's jet paused, tools suspended midair, eyes searching for a signal that had already passed. Then movement resumed, practiced and precise, as if nothing had happened. Phoenix lowered her helmet visor, the reflection catching the last of the morning light. Instead of her own face, the visor revealed Lieutenant Harrington's familiar features, his nod a silent message from the past. His lips moved in the reflection, forming words she'd heard only once. Checkmate moves first. The image faded as she looked away, replaced by the steady presence of the crew chief. Clipboard held in the same position as in the mirrored glass. Radio static rose and fell in the background, the pattern matching the satellite's coded pulse. Phoenix toggled a secondary encryption switch under the console, its green light blinking in sync with the biometric scanner she'd hidden in her locker. The connection was quiet, invisible to anyone but her, the circuit completing as the chip in her boot warmed against her ankle. Outside, the ground crew's movements became ritual. One mechanic tapped the landing gear strut in a measured pattern. Another aligned hoses in parallel lines, all pointing northwest. The choreography matched the call sign's flicker on the tower display, every adjustment tied to the silent rhythm of the base's machines. The primary monitor in the tower glitched, freezing on checkmate, for 11 seconds, just as it had during Harrington's final transmission at cable. The tower chief's hand hovered over the emergency override, but he let the moment pass, returning to his checklist as the image reset. Phoenix's helmet display overlaid the mission parameters, but the text shifted, revealing chess protocol instructions and coordinates she hadn't entered. The system accepted them without question, the waypoints matching the etched map in her locker. The satellite dish pulsed again, the vibration traveling through the aircraft's frame and into the control yoke. Her dog tags grew warm, the engraved chess piece pressing against her chest, the weight of the past settling in. Snippets of old comms traffic bled through the ground crew radio's fragments from cable, familiar and out of place. Structural integrity at 20%. Checkmate confirmed rally point. No one adjusted their headsets. The work continued. Hands steady. The ritual unbroken. Phoenix initiated the engine sequence, turbines spooling up with a resonance that echoed Cobble's failing generators. The satellite dish outside completed its rotation, locking into place as her helmet display stabilized on the true mission data. The tower cleared her for taxi, and the base clocks advanced except for the old analog chronometer in the control booth, its hands frozen at the moment Harrington's vitals flatlined. The tower chief met her gaze, his reflection layered over the unmoving clock. Radio silence held as she reached the runway. Then, for the first time in 6 years, the tower called her by the name on the screen. Checkmate, you are cleared for takeoff. The satellite dish emitted one last hum. Runway lights flickering as the aircraft rolled forward, the final transmission echoing in the quiet morning. As the aircraft came to a stop, Phoenix stepped down onto the tarmac, her boots meeting the same cracked surface where her authority had once been questioned. The squadron gathered around, ground crew forming a quiet line of respect. There was no ceremony, just a shared understanding that the mission's outcome had changed more than the day's orders. In the locker room, the photograph now showed all 5 Facesno redactions, no secrets. The chess king rested at the center of the shelf, its weight pressing into the metal, the marks beneath it matching those seen in the general's office. Pilots walked by in silence, fingertips brushing the lockers in a gesture of acknowledgement. Phoenix paused, her gaze steady. The details of her uniform, the worn boots, and the name badge reflected the years of service and the cost of duty. She understood the mission's success was not about personal vindication, but about the security and trust she had restored.